to this Livefika. This is a lecture where we will talk about international private law issues concerning more than one country. And with us today is Tove Sjövall. She is attorney at law and owner of Advokatbyåra Tove Sjövall AB. Please, the floor is yours, Tove.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the kind introduction. I'm very happy to be with all of you here today, and I will structure this seminar in the following way. First of all, I will tell you a little bit about myself so you understand why I am working with these kind of issues. Then I will go into the formal part, introducing international, private and procedural law. And this I will do. I will give you some lecture about the legal system behind, only for you to be able to understand the following parts of the seminar, so you also will understand the examples I have built up around the existing legal system. I will introduce to you a little bit about what is meant by your personal law, and this can be applied both for physical persons and for legal entities. And you are facing the same kind of problem, where do I belong? And this I will describe a little bit about. I will also tell you about what is meant by domicilation. Where do you belong? Where do you have your center of living when you move in between countries? I will give you some examples built up around the Institute of Divorce. And this is not because I like divorces, because I don't. But in reality, there is a legal framework, and therefore it's easy for me to make a case situation based on divorces, because that gives you a very good explanation of how the system works. If the time permits, I will give you a short introduction to Swedish international private law and the family law in Sweden, because for those of you coming from other countries, this may be of interest, because the legal systems between countries are so different. I will also, if time permits, talk a little bit about Swedish citizenship. And of course, feel free to ask questions. We will stop for your questions and try to answer them as far as possible. However, I should mention, I'm not a tax lawyer, so I'm not working with tax issues. For this, you need to be a specialist within taxes. And I have explicitly excluded this because I think you should mainly work only with taxes if you want to say that you're a tax lawyer. Further, if you have a specific case related to yourself, for instance, how do I bring home my pension from Azerbaijan through Russia to Sweden in the best way? I cannot solve your private issues during this seminar. I will be able to do that maybe at another time if there is an interest for this. But the questions you pose, I prefer if they are more of a general nature. If I want to answer a specific question, I need the time to really reflect. So now I will start telling you a little bit about myself. From the very beginning, I'm a business lawyer, specialized in international business law and also EU regulations, specifically competition law. For this reason, I had the opportunity to go to Brussels to work when Sweden was yet not a member state of the European Union. In Brussels, I worked, of course, with EU-related questions, but also with international business law. At that time, there was a large community of Swedish people living there due to tax reasons, because if you lived abroad for more than 7 years, I think, and if you had a fortune, you didn't have to pay any fortune tax in Sweden. So this group of people that moved from Sweden to Belgium, they were in Sweden used to being a worker, working both husband and wife. But when they came to Belgium, they were not permitted to work. They could only take care of their fortune and do other things not related to work. And sadly, many people suffered and had problems, for instance, within their marriage. If, let's say, Lasse and Lisa moved to Belgium, he's working with his assets and she's taking care of the children. Suddenly, they feel they cannot stay together. Then the question comes, where do we get the divorce? Do we do that in the country where we live? Or do we do that in the country where you're a citizen? All these questions were new to me, but I found it very, very interesting because I could apply it on my own situation. And it's just not only family issues, it could be any questions related to your private persons, for instance, labor law questions or dispute questions in respect to a contract, many different kinds of issues. So I started to work with this and have done that since. This was in 1990. I was in Brussels until 1996, being also a member of the Brussels Bar Association. And this material is becoming increasingly, it's growing and growing, and I'm sure you are aware of that these kind of questions arise every day as it is today. So this is why I deal with international private law. It's a great interest of mine, and today I have my own law firm working mainly with international private and procedural law and some business law to keep the bread and butter coming in. So I suggest we go to the first picture. So the term international private and procedural law is quite heavy. And now when I describe it, I will just say international private law to make it easier to pronounce. Otherwise, it's hard for you to say all the time. And this may lead you to think that there is some kind of international system in between countries that regulates all these questions that may arise when you move between countries. However, that is not the case. Each country has its own international private law. That means that Sweden has international private law, Russia has international private law. The same applies for India or Denmark or any country. However, within the European Union, there has become increasingly more and more common legislation applying to those people that move within the European Union. But that is mainly within marriage and within inheritance. There are many other areas where there is no legislation, but it's coming more and more. Outside the European Union, the legislation is very vague. One specific part of international private law is that since there is not that much legislation, when you work with these kind of issues, you have to find some kind of how to say gut feeling. Where is the wind blowing? Is there a general principle that could be applied? Because there is no legislation. And this means that many questions have to be led by the courts through their praxis because there is no legislation to fall back on. Please show the next picture. So what does international private law really concern? Well, it could be any kind of private situation. It could concern family law. It could concern inheritance. It could concern labor law, or a question regarding damages in a private situation. Well, there is a dispute in this respect. For instance, it could concern to decide who is the father of a child, or if somebody in Sweden goes to Germany and buys a beautiful car in Germany, something happens. Is it Swedish law or is it German law? All these questions with that specific speciality that it concerns more than one country. As you are fully aware, people from different nationalities get married today and they may move to a third country. Somebody passes away who is a citizen of one country but is living in another country and have assets in a third country. A company employs somebody from one country but places the employee in another country. Or let's say take this situation. A Swedish car is driving in France. In the back seat, there is a Danish citizen and an Icelandic citizen. Unfortunately, this car collides with a Spanish car driven by a Romanian citizen having a Frenchman in the back and maybe a German also. You have the question concerning damages. All this have to be solved, and this is really international private law in a nutshell. So then you can ask you, how does the lawmaker, the people making the legislation, look at these situations where there is an international context? Well, usually you fall back on that country's civil law. But when a situation has a connection to a foreign country, it is not for sure that the court would apply its own legal system. It may say that we in Sweden, Swedish court for instance, will apply French law due to that the situation has such a strong connection to this country that we say that this will be suitable in this situation. So please show next picture. The private law, the main task of the private law is to decide which legal situations shall be tried and according to foreign legislation, and which foreign legislation shall be used in this situation that you're in right now. So private law in itself does not solve the dispute there is. What it does, it says it's appointing some legislation to be applied. So you say that international private law really is laws regarding applicable laws. Laws about which legal system shall be used in an international context. And due to this, you use a term when you talk about international private law, you say that it concerns conflict of laws, two fighting legal system, which one should be applied, or in French, conflit de loi. In reality, it's not a conflict, but there could be different systems that both can be applied, and then you have to decide which one and for which reason. So, why at all apply foreign law? That you could ask yourself. As I've already mentioned, you say that people that move between countries, they usually adapt to the new system you're coming to. And this is really the reason why, for instance, a Swedish court would apply some other country's legal system, because it gives a more suitable result in the final end due to the international character of the case. Could you please show the next picture? The central thought within international private law is that any private law relation shall be submitted to or governed by the law of the country to which it has the strongest natural connection. And there was a case in Norway named the Irma Mignon case, where this was stated very clearly. When it is an international situation, you have to find out to which country this situation has its strongest connection. And this is again because you adapt to your situation, and therefore it gives a more suitable result. The problem we face, though, is that different countries says different about what creates the strongest connection. Some countries may say that it is your citizenship that creates the strongest connection, while other countries say that it is your domicilation that gives the strongest connection. And this all give rise to something called lame legal relations, and that is a legal situation that is valid in one country, but not in another. Please show the next picture. So that means that we have lame legal relations in respect of, for instance, marriages. You're married in one country, but not in another. You can have lame legal relations in respect of paternity, in respect of adoptions, in respect of wills, valid in one country, but not in another, in respect of purchase contracts. So a lot of situations may be legal in, for instance, Sweden, but not in South Africa. And this creates a lot of problems, as you may foresee. Could you please show the next picture? Collisions between legal systems can occur not within different countries, but also within a certain country. And this is very clear, I guess, if I say that the United States has more than 50 legal systems within the same country. And you have, for instance, in Switzerland, different cantons with different legal systems as well. And this also means that one state in America may have international private law saying something else than the next state saying. Also, you should be aware of that in some countries you apply different legal rules depending on which religion you have. And this is true in, for instance, in Morocco and Israel. So depending on your religious belonging, different rules may apply. So when we talk about these kind of rules which determine which of several regulatory systems in one country to be applied, we talk about interprovincial private law or interpersonal private law as well. An example, say that there has occurred a damage in America between cars, let's say. And you wonder which state's law shall be applied to this situation. I think you easily understand that you look at where did this accident take place, meaning that most likely you would apply the laws of that state. But if we have a situation that a legal issue concerns an American citizen, what do we do then to determine which system shall be applied? Usually, there are overall rules of this, federal laws stating how to look at the situation. But if there is no such law to fall back on, you have to fall back on the Irma Mignon. To which situation does this situation has the strongest and lasting ties? And this state's law will be applied if you don't find something to fall back on. Please show the next picture. When you talk about international private law, it also includes procedural laws. And I just want to mention this because it's very important. For instance, if you have, let's say, a divorce in America, will this be considered valid in Sweden? Or if you have some kind of other judgment, will this be enforceable in Sweden? And will it be accepted? Those kind of questions, they all relate to international procedural law. So it's mainly questions regarding the competence for a certain court in a country to bring up a case that has an international context, or the questions relating to enforcement of foreign judgments and acceptance, of course, as well. And finally, also the situation for a foreigner. Can someone from another country go to court in Sweden? So you may understand that for the question of which legal system shall be used, the court handling the matter must be competent. So that will be the first issue for the court to decide. Can we bring up this case when it has an international context? And if we can do that, which country's legislation shall we apply? So you may think that it's only the courts that has to deal with these kind of issues, but that's not true. And since you all, I guess, have some kind of connection to Sweden, I guess you all also have come across the tax authority in Sweden. There you go to register or to ask for permission to get married and all other issues. So that means that also the tax authority have to deal with international private law. And a lot of other authorities do the same and have to deal with these kind of issues. You can take the next picture, please. Let's say, to give you an example, a client is coming to me and asking for a will that shall be valid both in Sweden, in India, and Russia, due to that he has assets in all of these three countries. What do I have to do then? Well, first of all, me as a Swedish lawyer, I have to turn to a lawyer attorney in India and ask, how do you look upon this situation from an international private law perspective? And India may say, well, due to the connection to Russia, we have to fall back on Russian law. And then I go to Russia and they may say, well, we will fall back on Swedish law. If I then make a document that I know from the very beginning follows the legal rules both in Sweden, India, and Russia, I have avoided the conflict. And therefore, within international private law, you talk about conflict avoidance, a way to avoid the problem with international private law. Please show the next picture. As you may know, it is possible to choose in which country you should start a legal procedure. And that means that you actually can start legal procedures about the same thing in two different countries. But you may understand that they will be very costly and very heavy as well. Instead of doing that, I can, as a lawyer, try to investigate and find out in which country will I get the most favorable result. And as an example, while I was working in Belgium, this is many years ago, but at that time it was possible for a spouse after a divorce to get a very good alimony. At the other hand, in Sweden, this was not possible then, and it's not possible today, or at least it's very hard. What I could do then is that I could start a process, let's say for divorce in Sweden, but ask for alimony if the parties had connection to those two countries, knowing that in Belgium, I would get a very good result in respect of the alimony, and in Sweden, I would get a quick divorce. And this is called forum shopping. And as the bad part of forum shopping, I can mention that it's not unusual that people go to Las Vegas in the United States to get a quick divorce. And what they do is that they create some kind of connection to that state, and that connection is not real. And therefore you say that this is the bad part of forum shopping, even though it's still possible. In respect of divorces, I should mention that Sweden today is considered a divorce paradise due to the reason that you hand in your application, you don't have to give any reasons, and you pay 900 kronor and you get your divorce immediately. It's quick, it's cheap, and you don't have to give any reasons. And there are people that try to find a connection to Sweden in order to bring up such a case just due to those reasons. This is just to mention that even Sweden has become a bit of a divorce paradise. May I please have the next picture? With personal law is considered the legal system to which you have your long-lasting ties, and therefore shall be used on the person's personal circumstances. And as I have mentioned already before, there is some kind of dispute between whether your domicilation shall be used or whether your citizenship shall be used. You may take the next picture, please. Here in Sweden, we tend to fall back on lex domicili in Latin, which means law of the country of residence. And this is again due to the reason that people adapt to this new situation they're in. And it's the same for people from Sweden going abroad. Let's say we have lots of Swedish people going to France. They adapt to the new system and they get acquainted with it. And then it may be worthwhile to apply French law to a Swedish couple in a legal situation in France. But again, the definition of domicile can be different from one country to another. And I just want to mention that also for legal entities, you have the same problem. Where do they belong? Is it where they cannot show that they are a citizen of a certain country? So you have to look at other factors. What you look at for a legal entity is first, of course, where is this legal entity registered? But it's not for sure that you have to register in all countries in order to be said to belong to that country. What do you look at then? When you can look at where the board has its residency, and then you would apply that country's legal system. And thirdly, if that's not possible, you have to look at where this legal entity has its main field of business, and in that way try to create to which country a legal entity belongs. So, domicilation then. Please, next picture.
Tove, could I have a quick question?
Yes, go ahead.
Will you talk about the divorce? Will all countries have to accept, for example, a divorce made in Sweden or Las Vegas?
No, that's part of the procedural law. And as I said, you have legal situations that are considered halting. You can be divorced in Sweden, but not in Iran, for instance. So you have to be aware of that in international situations, different countries accept judgments from each other differently. It's not for sure that a divorce is considered legal in another country. So that you have to be aware of.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
So we take the next picture. All of you participating could think about, to which country do I belong? Where do I have my domicilation? And this is not an issue if you don't change country, but if you have moved to a new country, do I belong to this country and its legal system, or do I still belong to the country of origin from where I come? And I have written down the definition according to Swedish law in how to decide where you are domiciled. There are two requisites that have to be fulfilled. First of all, you have to move from one country to another physically. The second is that you shall have the aim to stay in this new country, if not forever, at least for quite some time. So that means that if you make short-term trips for tourist reasons or study reasons or business reasons, you don't change your domicile. It has to be more to it. But at the other hand, you can have your new domicilation in another country from day one when you come to that country, due to that you have the aim to stay there for quite some time. And if you have your domicile in a new country, that will not change until you physically move again to another country. But what do you look at to decide where you have your domicilation? Well, for instance, information in respect of registration is a parameter, something that you look at, but it's not enough and it's not sufficient. You have to look at other factors. And of course, if you have a work permit or a residence permit, this is also considered, but it's not enough. You look at if you have a house or if you have an apartment in that country, and that is also an indicium of that you have your domicile in that country. And the citizenship can, of course, be considered. Let's say that to make it easy, a Swedish person moves to Spain and decides to leave his Swedish citizenship and apply for Spanish. Of course, that would be taken into consideration when deciding where this person has his domicilation. Also, family relations has an impact, and usually minor children are considered to have the same domicilation as the custodians. But at the other hand, husband and wife does not anymore have to have the same domicilation. And I've had quite some instances where married couples have been considered to have their domicile in different countries. At the other hand, to make it more complicated, diplomats and alike, they can go abroad, for instance, from France to another country for many, many, many years and still be considered to have their domicile in the home country. And that also applies for companies when they are sending out their employees. That employee could be considered to belong to Sweden, for instance, if he has been sent out from Sweden to another country, despite that he has been in another country for 20 years. So to determine whether a person has his domicile in one country or the other can be very, very hard. And in the final end, you have to look at small things like where does this person have his bank account? Where does he make his bank withdrawals? Where does he have his doctor or his dentist? Or where does he have his insurances? All these factors are looked upon in order to decide where a person has his domicile. And just take the example, many Swedish people, again, they move to Spain or France half of the year. So let's say they live for 6 months in Sweden and 6 months in Spain. Where does this person have his domicile? Then you have to look at all these factors in order to find out where he has his main center of living. A complicating factor is that you can have your domicile in Sweden or in another country according to Swedish international private law. Let's say that Swedish international private law says that you have your domicile in Spain. At the same time, the tax system in Sweden can say that you have your domicile in Sweden due to tax reasons. And then you yet have another definition under social law and also under criminal law. And this you should bear in mind because it's not necessary to have the same domicile in respect of tax and international private law. You should just be aware of this. So please show the next picture. In respect of citizenship, we have issues related to people having more than one citizenship. And I dare say that if it is a person in Sweden having a case in a Swedish court and he's a Swedish citizen and also, let's say, a US citizen, the Swedish court would fall back on the Swedish citizenship. But if this person instead belongs to 2 other countries, then again, you have to decide which one of these 2 citizenships is his real citizenship, looking at all the connecting factors as mentioned before, to find out where you have your effective citizenship. This was the heavy part, and I do hope you haven't fallen asleep so far, but I want to give you this background in order to understand the examples I'm going into, and you need that background to really be able to follow the rest. So if you have any questions, do feel free to ask.
I've got a question. Caroline, would you like to raise your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, well, I have this question because when you live abroad in a country where I live in France, right, and we have tax on inheritance. I lived here for 30 years. I have parents who are quite old now in Sweden. And my question is about the inheritance. What will happen? Because some people tell me that it's Swedish law that will apply, because my parents are Swedish citizens living in Sweden, but I'm not 100% sure. So would you please explain how it works?
Yes. Are you asking on behalf of your parents, or are you asking on behalf of yourself?
Well, more on behalf of myself, of course. My parents, I know they haven't done anything. So, I mean, they have no testament, nothing at all. So it will go from my father to my mother and then to the kids. I'm one of the children. I live in France, of course. Yes. So my question is more what they have to do, if they have to do something. And of course, well, what will happen when they pass away?
I will tell you. Your parents, Swedish citizens living in Sweden, never change their domicilation. Swedish law will apply due to EU regulations and Swedish law. Nothing strange in that situation. In Sweden, there is no inheritance tax, meaning that there will be in Sweden no inheritance tax. But if you inherit while being domiciled in France, you may come across that France will ask for inheritance tax due to what you receive from Sweden, and this you should check up. If we change and say that in respect of yourself, due to the EU regulations that we have today, there is no question that it's French law that will be applied on respect of the inheritance that you leave. However, you have a choice. You can make a will stating that I want Swedish law to apply, and this will be upheld also in France. But you have to do something. This is nothing that is coming automatically. So you have to make a will, and you have to make a clear statement that you want Swedish law to apply on the order of inheritance. There will be tax on the inheritance in France after you, I dare say.
Okay, so my parents cannot say that Swedish law should apply, but I can say that Swedish law should apply.
Your parents do not need to say Swedish law because it is Swedish law.
Yeah, okay. So this is something that I will have to look at when it happens, let's say. I can't do anything beforehand to avoid this.
What is it you want to avoid?
Well, of course, me paying the tax on inheritance in Sweden. I mean, in that case, money will have to stay in Sweden, for example. That's what
this is a French tax issue. So yeah, if you want to know what applies in respect of you receiving an inheritance in France, you have to consult a French tax lawyer. But I do know that there will be taxes on what you receive from Sweden to you in France, but you should check it out.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Well,
I have a question.
Yes, please.
You talked about in the example of the divorce in Las Vegas and around that time, you spoke about having a connection to a country or a state. Could you just expand a little bit on the notion of a connection to someplace?
Yes, I told you that Sweden has become a divorce paradise.
Right.
I'm now making up an example. Let's say that two citizens from two completely different countries outside the European Union, they have found out that it's very easy to get a divorce in Sweden. Then they may say, let's move to Sweden for a month or 2 or 3 or something and register there to get a quick divorce. They try to create a domicilation, a situation that gives them the permit to apply for divorce in Sweden. And they could do that. And this is at times being misused, because if these two citizens do that only in order to get their divorce, they are doing it for the wrong reason.
Well, the question really wasn't about the connection to the divorce. It was more about this idea of a connection. My girlfriend and I were trying to move back to Sweden with our 2 kids. And in all the websites, there's a lot of this talk about having a connection to Sweden. And we don't really understand what that phrase, to have a connection, means.
Is your girlfriend a Swedish citizen?
She is, and both children. And I'm an American citizen living in Switzerland.
Oh dear. Have you been married for a long time?
We're not actually married. We've been living together. We met 10 years ago. Our oldest child is 8. We've been living together since we met.
You know, there are new rules in the new Swedish migration law.
We know.
You know,
Yeah.
and if, say like this, if you have been sambos or married for more than 10 years, and you're married to or sambo with a Swedish citizen, and you live in another country where you're not a citizen, and evidently you do that in Switzerland.
Yes.
You should be able to apply for residency in Sweden without having to fulfill the rules in respect of having support. Your wife have to be able to support you and have a specific apartment or like for the whole family. These rules will not apply if you have been together for more than 10 years and living in a third country where you're not a citizen.
Okay.
So you should look into this, because if you want to go back to Sweden, the new legislation makes it more easy for people that have been together with a Swedish citizen for more than 10 years.
Okay. Okay.
So I might give you good advice here.
Yes. But do you have, can you expand a little bit on the phrase to have a connection to a country? Could you give me maybe an example of what might be considered a connection to a country?
Where do you go to your doctor?
Well, we currently live full-time. We're domiciled in and registered in Switzerland. So
I guess you go to your doctor there. You know, all these factors, they are connecting factors. Where you have your doctor, where you have your insurance, where you have a dentist, where you have your family, where you have your living, where you're registered, etc., etc.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. No other questions? I will then continue. And in respect of international private law, there are mainly 3 sets of rules. The first rule concerns the Scandinavian countries. There is legislation to fall back on. If I, as a Swede, move to Denmark and then move to Norway, there is legislation. Apart from that, within the European Union, you also have legislation, not on all aspects, but on many aspects. And that makes life easier, because I can then say that it's the same inheritance law in Sweden as it is in France. Outside, however, then it becomes more and more complicated, because there is not that much legislation to fall back on, but we have some ruling in respect of family issues that you can fall back on, but not that much. So 3 different legal systems depending on which countries that are concerned. And I will now talk about these divorce cases. And again, it's not because I like divorce, it's only because it gives good examples that are easy to follow. So if I take the example that you have 2 Norwegian people moving to Sweden, and they were married in Norway, and they moved to Sweden and live here for more than 2 years, they come to me and ask, can we split up? And I can say that, yes, Due to the Scandinavian legislation, it's possible for you to apply for divorce. You don't have to go back to Norway. They then ask, what happens to our financial situation? As you all are aware, when you're married, you have to split your economy. And those rules in respect of the financial part of a marriage are very different from different countries. So they ask, what will apply in this respect? And then I can say that due to that you have been domiciled in Sweden for more than 2 years, Swedish law will apply in this respect. But if they came to me already after 1 year in Sweden, I would say that Swedish court, if those issues are brought up by a Swedish court, will be decided according to Norwegian law. If a Norwegian citizen dies while domiciled in Sweden, the same legislation for Scandinavia would say that Swedish law will apply in respect of the inheritance. And as you may see, it's not that complicated in respect of Scandinavia, but still there are reasons to be aware of when you move between countries. If you instead have a French and Italian couple that got married and they took their first domicile in England, they come to Sweden and they live here and they have the same situation. They ask, can we divorce in Sweden? And I say that, well, we have to look into the Brussels II regulation, which is an EU regulation stating when you can have a divorce and in which country. And this legislation will say that, yes, you can divorce in Sweden due to your domicilation here. And then they ask, but I would prefer to do it in Italy because I'm an Italian citizen. Or the Frenchman says, I want to do this in France because I feel more connected to France. And I would have to tell them that you cannot. It's not possible to the laws that apply in this situation, which means that you have to do it in Sweden. Then they ask the same question as the Norwegian. What applies in respect of our assets? How do we divide them? And I can say that if you have been here for more than 2 years, it is Swedish law that applies. If you have been here for less than 2 years, well, the Swedish court would have to apply English law because there is where you took your first domicilation. All this applies in respect of what's considered as old marriages. If you got married after 2019, there are other rules that applies. And in respect of your financial situation within the European Union, the country where you first took your domicile as married will be applied no matter how many times you move around. You have the freedom to make a choice in an agreement, but if you're not aware of this, the country where you first took your domicile, that legislation will apply. Now, the Frenchman that lived in Sweden, he passed away. And then comes the question of inheritance. And I can say that due to that he has been domiciled here in Sweden, it is Swedish law. And this will, in respect of inheritance, also include all his property, no matter where it's found. So assets in France or in Romania or wherever shall be included when you split the inheritance according to Swedish law. This man could, if he was aware of it, made a choice in a will stating that I want French law to apply to the inheritance. But then you have to do this in a clear statement in a will so that it could be found when you pass away. And if nothing is done, you always apply within the European Union the law of the country where you are domiciled when you pass away. The third situation, that's an Iranian and Iraqi man and woman, and they got married under Muslim law, and they took their domicile in Iran as the first country where they lived as married. However, they come to Sweden and they live here for quite some time. And they have the same problem again. And they ask, can we get divorced in Sweden? And I say that yes, if you have been here for more than 1 year, you can divorce in Sweden. And questions related to custody, alimony, children, etc., may be brought up here if the children are here. When it then comes to division of joint property between husband and wife, Swedish law will apply if they have been here for more than 2 years. But if they had not, then a Swedish court would have to apply Iranian law on all aspects of division of the economy between husband and wife. And I think you may foresee that the result will be very different depending on which legislation that will be applied. The divorce then from Sweden, will it be valid in Iran? I dare say most likely not. And here you have the example of a halting divorce, a divorce that is legally valid in one country, but not in another. The Iranian man, he dies while living here. And since he has been living here for a long time, Swedish law will apply. But also he could make a will stating that I want Iranian legislation to be applied in respect of the right of inheritance. That would be possible also for him. Are there any questions so far? Okay. I have another example. American husband and wife. They got married in America and they moved to Sweden. And I will describe a situation that is quite common, that the husband works and the woman is home with the children. And they also get to the point there where they want to split up. And they ask, can we do that in Sweden? And yes, they can if they have lived here for quite some time. But the woman, she asks, can I do this in America instead? I would like to. And I say, yes, most likely you can, but that will be much more costly and take much longer time. And physically you are in Sweden, but you will have to go to America for this court procedure. And I don't think that is really practical in the situation you're in right now. She also asks about the custody in respect of the children. And since the children, they are in Sweden, the Swedish court will handle also this situation. And then she says, I want to go back to America with the children. And I say, don't do that without the permission of your husband. Because they have joint custody of the children. Also, that's the main way to reason also after a divorce. And if she goes back to America with the children without having the permission of her husband, she is in real trouble. Because then there are international conventions. You can go to the Foreign Department in Sweden and get legal aid to get the children back. And what she has done is a criminal offense. When she has had her divorce, she is then in a new situation in Sweden. She cannot leave Sweden with the children without the consent of her husband, and she has no job. Still, she must take in this new situation and respect of her residence permit, because the first permit she had was based on the fact that she had the connection to her husband, and suddenly this connection is gone. And what does then Migrationsverket look upon? Because she has to apply again. She has to show connection. And of course, the children being in Sweden is a very strong connecting factor. But the best if she can get a new job, or if she would meet somebody else that she could relate to and say that I have a connecting factor with. Or in other ways adapted to Sweden. Let's say she had lived here for 20 years and been a board member of different organizations and the like. She may be able to show that she has a strong connection anyway. But she has suddenly, after the divorce, a completely new situation in respect of her residence permit. Finally, I will give you an example in respect of the new legislation within the European Union. It's an American man and a Swedish woman, and they meet in Romania and they cohabit, they live together. Then they move to Sweden and live here for more than 1 year. And then the woman says, no, I don't want to do this anymore. And she moves out. And they don't have any agreement in respect of what shall apply on division of their property. And in Sweden, there is cohabitation legislation saying that when you split up in a relation, you should divide all assets that you have acquired as cohabitants, meaning that if you bought a house together, this shall be split. The sofa you bought together shall be split, etc., etc. And then the question comes, which country's legislation shall apply, since this is an American man and a Swedish woman living in Sweden, having lived in Romania. And since they have not lived in Sweden for so long, the Swedish court will say it's actually Romanian law that shall apply in respect of division of property. So, can we show the next picture, please? There we go. What I want to with this seminar is to open your eyes. I want you to be aware of that moving between countries is not that easy. And if you're prepared and if you are aware of that different legal questions can arise due to that you have changed from one country to another, you are much better prepared to face the problem that may occur. And there are ways of avoiding the worst problems that you can do before you move from one country to another. And that is, for instance, from at least the Swedish perspective, make a marriage contract with a choice of law clause. If you as Swedish people are moving to another country, you can make a prenuptial or marriage contract stating how you want your assets to be looked upon, either as private assets or as common assets, and also include a choice of law clause saying that we always want Swedish law to apply. That means that if you move to Singapore and want a divorce, you can go back to Sweden and be sure of that the Swedish court always will apply Swedish law. It's another question what the courts in Singapore would say if you decide to bring up your divorce case there. But if you turn to Sweden, you're sure that Swedish law will be applied. You can also draft wills stating that if something happens to me, I want Spanish law to apply if you're Spanish, or Danish law if you're Danish, or whatever country that you come from. But you make an explicit choice, meaning that it will be much easier for the people left behind to take care of everything after you have passed away, knowing that you have made an explicit choice. And thirdly, it's possible to make an agreement concerning applicable law. You don't have to make the marriage contract if you don't want to. You can make an agreement in itself stating that we decide that French law shall apply to all questions related to our financial situation. And then you register that, and then you have made an explicit choice. If you are in Sweden, coming from another country, I just want to mention that in Sweden today, it's possible to make a future power of attorney stating that if I fall ill, I want, for instance, my husband or my children or my brother to be able to take all decisions in respect of my person and my financial situation. So if you have that power and decided that you want somebody else to take those decisions, you avoid that the state comes in and decides who is going to make those decisions, because that's what's going to happen. Otherwise, if there is no such future power of attorney, the state will decide who will decide on your behalf. So the future power of attorney is a way of avoiding this situation. And again, I said and mentioned that within the European Union, there is new inheritance legislation from 2015 and new regulations in respect of marriages from 2019. And that helps when you move around. But if you have drafted agreements, it's always easier. So I will ask you to show the next picture. As mentioned, from a Swedish perspective, if you come abroad and come to Sweden to live, it's very good to be aware of that you shall not go back to your home country without the permission of your spouse if you bring the children. And I've seen this many times, and therefore that's why I'm telling this again. And in respect for those of you that come to Sweden to live here, I just want to mention that if you have a legal problem, usually you have in your home insurance something called legal protection, meaning that your insurance company can help you with part of the costs if you have a problem, meaning that it will be easier for you to ask, for instance, an attorney for help because your insurance company will help you with the costs. If you don't have an income, you can even get legal aid from the state, and that could be good to be aware of. I will see if there are any questions or everything is very clear so far.
I do have a question.
Yes.
I was just wondering, because is there any sort of neutral instance where you could go to, like if you have your country legislation says one thing and another country says another, who decides which one? Like, am I divorced or not? Am I married or not? Like in a third country. So who has the latest, latest quote in this?
Well, you always first have to think about, where do I belong? Where do I have a domicile? If you're domiciled in Sweden, and let's say that you have this divorce here, this is of course considered valid here. But if you go with this document to another country, they may say something differently. There is nothing in between saying you have the strongest connection here or strongest connection there. You have to, again, look at all the factors for the persons involved in the situation to decide which legal system to be applied. And this legal system may say one thing, but unfortunately, in another country, they may say something different about the document you have achieved in Sweden, for instance. So there is no intermediary. You know, I talked about conflict of laws, legal systems, which one should be applied. And then we have to make this valuation to find out to which country you have your strongest connection.
Okay, yep. Do we have any other questions?
If not, I will briefly, for those of you coming to Sweden, since I'm not aware of who of the participants are coming to Sweden and which ones from Sweden that are going to abroad, I will just mention that, and I have done it before, that the marriage code and the code in respect of cohabitation that exist in Sweden are different, but they somehow regulate some fields commonly. For instance, the main principle in Sweden in everything, I'm sure you are aware of that, is somehow equality. And that is also the same thing about the marriage code. So if you split up, you think that each of the spouses shall be have the possibility to support themselves by themselves afterwards, after the divorce, and they will have joint custody, taking care of the children, for instance, 1 week, one spouse, and the other week, the other spouse. Everything is very equal. And if you, for instance, at the date of divorce, together, all of you have assets of 100, you deduct the debts, and you have a net of 50, and this will be split into equal parts. So you will come out with equal assets after the divorce. In respect of cohabitation, there is a main difference that is very, very important. If you're married, you inherit each other. If you only cohabit, you have no such right. Meaning that if, for instance, you have bought a big house, a costly house together, and one part passes away, the remaining part will have to be able to buy out that house part in order to give the inheritors their share. So no right of inheritance is in respect of cohabitation. And when you split up as cohabitants, you only divide such assets that you have bought for the purpose of having as cohabitants. So your own car is kept out, your riding horse is kept out, your sailing boat is kept out. You only split such assets that you bought for the common purpose of having as cohabitants. So that was very, very, very shortly about the differences of being married and cohabitation in Sweden. I saw something coming by. Is there a question?
I think we already had that one. It was Caroline's question that we had.
Okay.
No, I asked a question, but not on divorce, on citizenship.
Okay, go ahead.
I have someone I know in the UK. She's a Swedish citizen, and she has adult children who are not Swedish citizens. Are they in fact able to obtain Swedish citizenship?
There are rules that if you're born out of Sweden and having lived out of Sweden for quite some time, you have to actively try to keep up your citizenship. I think that when you have reached the age of 18, you have to show that you still have connecting factors to Sweden in order to withhold your citizenship.
That's true, and it has worked for one person I know, but the UK person had, I think the children's Swedish passports expired while they were minors, and so they did not go through that process at the age of 18. are they able now to regain Swedish?
It's very hard. It's very hard because they will not be able to show the connection to Sweden anymore.
Okay, thank you.
The way they could do it is to come here and live here very often and to learn Swedish, etc., etc. But you know, that's not that easily done.
Understood. Thank you.
You're welcome. So when we are talking about citizenship, I will just tell you, to become a Swedish citizen today, you have to reach the age of 18. You have to be able to prove your identity. And of course, you must have a residence permit, a right of residence, or residence card in Sweden for 5 years. And you must have been living continuously in Sweden for this time. This time is less if you're married to a Swedish citizen, but the period has to be continuous, which means that if you go back to your home country and live there for a year or so, then you have broken this continuity. And finally, while being here, you must have conducted yourself well while being here. That means that hopefully you have no debts, you have no criminal record, and all these factors will be looked at on. And I know also there is an ongoing discussion about that people applying for Swedish citizenship shall be aware and have the possibility to speak the Swedish language. This is not finally decided, but I know it's an ongoing discussion. If you want to find out more about becoming a Swedish citizen, actually the homepage of Migrationsverket is very good and everything can be read in the English language, and you get very good help from the homepage. So it's a good advice if you have these thoughts, look into the homepage of Migrationsverket in English, and if you cannot solve the problem, do feel free to come to me. And there, I will ask you to show the last picture.
Before that, we have Robert having a question.
Okay.
Oh, hey, son. A quick question. This might be a stupid one, I'm sorry, but what is the difference between a national and a citizen? And what does it mean in Sweden in terms of, you know, the different laws or whatever, different separations between nationals and citizens? I sometimes see the term national and a citizen. For myself, I was born in Sweden. My father is Swedish. I lived for the first 4 years of my life in Sweden, and then later on in my life in Sweden. I would assume that I'm a citizen, but I want to make sure, you know, I want to find out what is the difference between national and citizen.
To me, it would be the same thing. If you're a Swedish citizen, you hold a Swedish passport.
Yes, I do have one.
Then you are a Swedish citizen. It's stated in the passport.
Good. Okay.
A national of Sweden, for me, is a Swedish citizen. I have not heard that there should be any difference between those two terms.
I think it may be more in the US that there's a difference between it. They seem to differentiate a lot between it. But having read a lot of documentation recently, trying to get back into Sweden with the COVID and everything, you know, we have a lot of laws, and sometimes it says that this applies to nationals and this does not apply to nationals. And I was just not sure.
No, I would say it's the same, but at least from a Swedish perspective.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Can you show the last picture?
I have another question, Caroline. Sorry, Tove.
Yes.
Yeah, I just had another question. You talk about passport, Swedish passport. My 3 children has a Swedish citizenship because they're not born in Sweden, but I did the necessary filling in the forms before the age of 22. So they are considered still Swedish citizens, and they have a Swedish personnummer, the number. But actually, I haven't bothered to go to the Swedish embassy in Paris anymore to get them, or they haven't bothered to get a Swedish passport. And you just spoke about Swedish passport. Does it make a difference?
I wouldn't think so.
I mean, they have a Swedish personnummer. Isn't that enough to be a Swedish citizen? Is the passport legal paper you need to have?
As I see it, you don't get a Swedish personal number unless you're a Swedish citizen.
Yes, exactly.
And if you're a Swedish citizen and have a personal number, you should be able to get a Swedish passport.
Yes, of course, you can have it, but I haven't bothered because, you know, it's a bit complicated. They have to go to, they don't live in France and so on. So now, for the time being, they don't have the document as such, but of course they could. So they just have the French passport. But what I mean is, does it make a difference to have this passport or not, to say that you are a Swedish citizen if they have a Swedish personnummer?
Well, these questions came up the other day. What does it mean to be a Swedish citizen? And that really means that you may use the Swedish social security system. And if you go to many other countries as a Swedish citizen showing a Swedish passport, you may not have to apply for a visa.
Of course. In those cases, it can be very practical, of course.
It could be very practical.
Of course.
And you're covered by Sweden if you have a problem, if you're a Swedish citizen.
Yeah. But the passport, I mean, it's a choice to go and get it or not to have it. Because, I mean, to have two passports is a bit complicated also, but of course, it can be very practical, I understand that.
It can be practical. For that reason, it could be worthwhile to apply for a Swedish passport. But if they are not traveling, and that if they don't see any such reason, maybe they can wait.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there another question? Is there another question, or is something happening?
No, I don't think we have any more questions.
Here comes something from Anja Briggs. If you're a Swedish citizen, oh, it disappeared. I didn't have a chance to read it. Robert Blomstrand has a question.
Ja, hej igen.
Hey.
In South Africa, I have a small business, and it's a difficult question because there's probably so much to it, but maybe just that you can maybe just give me an answer on the surface. I mean, one of my considerations is what are the implications? I'm planning on I'm moving to Sweden. We're just busy applying. I need to consider whether I should whether I can continue operating the business, but from Sweden, but keeping it registered. It is registered in South Africa, VAT registered, etc., etc. Should I keep the company as it is there? Do I need to start a new company in Sweden? Is it maybe better not to work for, not to have my own company, and rather maybe I should just become an employee? But I don't know if you can maybe answer that just at a high level.
No, I cannot, because I can say that all these questions are tax-related questions. Whether you should have a company both in South Africa and Sweden gives rise to tax issues. And I know that it's fully possible for you to have your company in Sweden and have a company in South Africa, but the outcome of your companies may give rise to different questions and double taxation issues, and that you should look into thoroughly before taking different steps, because that's really what's going to decide your choice in the final end.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, can I just fill in there, Robert? We're going to have a Livefika. It's going to be in Swedish though, on the 8th of December with Graham Thornton, where you could ask your questions regarding taxes.
Okay, thank you very much. 8th of December.
Yep.
Well, if you all feel fully aware of what's going on, I'm very happy. And again, the aim of this seminar is to be an eye-opener and to make you understand that different laws may apply depending on where you belong, depending on your citizenship, depending on your domicilation. And it's important to remember that if you change to live in one country and you go and make your documents from that country's perspective, they are living documents, meaning that if you again change to another country, you have to review your situation, because each country has its international private law as stated, and to be aware of what's going on in that country, it's always best to consult with somebody being, for instance, attorney in that country. So I guess that's what I had to tell, and do feel free to come back if you have any issue you want to discuss or if you need help.
And we would like to say thank you, Tove, for this fabulous exclusive seminar that you held for the members of Swedes worldwide. And if you want to get in contact with Tove, she is one of our really one of the valued experts here at Swedes Worldwide, and she also she's offering some special prize if you want to get in contact with her. And if you want to, you saw her contact details, just the picture we just had, or you can just email us at the same email address where you when you applied for this seminar. And as said, on the 8th of December, we're going to have a new Livefika in Swedish with Graham Thornton. And we also have a Livefika on the 16th of December with Familjens Jurist, where we also will add some other questions to this. So you're more than welcome. And once again, Tove Sjövall, thanks a lot. You've been fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good
Bye-bye.
day.
Bye.